So in this video, I'm going to talk more about civil, ethical, moral, uncivil, unethical, and immoral processes, expressions, self-expressions, and embodiments with different mind, body, environment constituents and mind, body, environment constituencies. Uh, Similarly, how I've talked about in a few videos already, but I want to focus more again on these two principles with actually a third concept that I'm bringing in here regarding severity that has more to do with situations as well as direct perceptions, actions, motivations, emotions, feelings, and behaviors that are often direct to various processes, expressions, self-expressions, and embodiments that involve uh, the harm inflicted, the proportionality, and particularly the severity of the situation or what's being inflicted upon the self within the self, another, or others, and how that impacts their well-being and perceptions too, as well as their emotions, their feelings, their motivations, their behavior, and their actions too. Um, Oftentimes, when we have situations that are very severe, this is when it becomes a big civil concern, an ethical concern, a moral concern. We recognize things like the uncivility of it, how it's uncivil. We recognize that it's unethical, it's unethics, it's immoral, and the immorality to that within various layers. And this is why we often have penalties or people get pretty frustrated. Often this starts actually with direct recognitions of the self within the self and another. We don't want that to happen to us. That's a very serious thing that's being done. I don't want, for example, my privacy or my autonomy to be stifled. When you see somebody being, say, restrained, like particularly like when it comes to stifling autonomy, and they haven't really done too much to warrant that. Maybe they're just keeping to themselves and or reading a book. And this is what we've seen in totalitarian states. People have been reading the wrong literature, and they get often policed for that, thrown in jail, or even for expressing the wrong ideas. This is a big breach of autonomy, and we recognize that as very severe and serious, and it inflicts a lot of harm. And it's not just to the person whose rights are being stifled and who's directly being harmed. It's also to the people who are observing it, because then they think that can happen to me, right? And that's a terrible thing, and that puts there's a fear to that. So there's a psychological harm that's inflicted upon the self through observing that, through understanding that in relation to each other. And that occurs with, so you have a simultaneous perception of a civil, uncivil, ethical, unethical, immoral, moral perceptions that can occur. They can occur independently, and they're going to vary also depending on the individual's perceptions and recognition, particularly the level of recognition and awareness they have regarding the self and the person, and also the level of harm that's being inflicted. And this is where things like proportionality and the harm principle become very important, but also recognizing the severity of each situation. In some cases, maybe it's a child and they just have a toy confiscated, and the toy is being confiscated because they did something bad, right? And they don't quite understand why. And it's a parent who's confiscating the toy, but maybe it's like they poked another kid in the eye with this stick, and they thought it was funny, so they're laughing at it, right? And they were playing with a truck moments ago, and they go return to the truck, and the parent takes the truck and says, "You don't do that. You don't poke other kids in the eye with a stick." And the kid, right, responds, and then maybe starts crying, right? The kid starts crying. That's the severity there. Like, okay, the they're being punished for good reason, and the harm that's being inflicted towards the child in terms of the emotional pain is less so than the two types of harm: the harm that's being inflicted upon the other child, and also the potential long-term consequences of that child developing a sense that it's okay to actually breach another person's self, inflict harm to that self for your own enjoyment, for your own pleasure, right? Because you find it amusing. That would produce more of these uncivil, unethical, immoral promoting behaviors, perceptions, actions, emotions, and feelings within the child and that child's subsequent development. Um, while what the parents teaching the child there and is trying to encourage is more of these civil, ethical, or moral perceptions to occur, and or because it could be all of them, or it could be just one, two, or three, as well as to downregulate the others or to recognize the others and to learn to actually appropriately accommodate for them, to be able to address them appropriately and to recognize the self in a healthy way and to support well-being. So that would involve being able to recognize things like uncivil, unethical, or immoral, various forms of perceptions, expressions, self-expressions, and embodiments that are occurring at different mind, body, environment constituents and involve mind, body, environment constituencies, and that have different perceptions, emotions, behaviors, motivations, actions, ideas, thoughts, reasoning, and cognitions uh, that manifest through those expressions, self-expressions, embodiments, and processes. And it's important to be able to develop our own recognition and awareness of things like the harm principle, understanding severity, and understanding proportionality to be able to regulate ourselves in relation to various civil, ethical, moral, uncivil, unethical, moral, or immoral perceptions, actions, motivations, emotions, feelings, ideas, thoughts, ideologies, uh, actions, behaviors, cognitions, and to be able to address these situations more effectively, to be able to actually support civil relations and also to basically sustain civilization. Because at the core of civilization are these two notions of of the self and also the person that come. Well, the person comes a little bit right after understanding the self within the self and other and or others. Um, but and then the person is more uh, has to do with uh, more to do with the superego and how we look at things in terms of more of this ethical or moral plane, but also does have a lot to do with the civil process. And civil tends to be more how we deal with each other on a day-to-day basis and how we also treat ourselves, because we want to maintain civil relations and actually benefit from civilization as much as possible. And we benefit through civilization by treating others um, as if we had a self and that we do have a self. It's not just that as if we had a self, so that there is a self there. And if we treat each other like there is a self there, that recognize the self subjectivity, that's going to promote greater harmony and greater well-being, not just for the self within the self, but others and of civilization at large, within and across civilization. Regarding the CSM, the consciousness self model, and that involves our conscious awareness as well as a bunch of perceptual processes and cognitive processes that are occurring um, regarding the self, and also the mind body environment constituents and mind body environment constituencies that are in relation to the CSM, where often we experience various different types of pain or negative emotion, negative feeling in response to uh, uncivil, unethical, and immoral perceptions, actions, behaviors, emotions, feelings, thoughts, ideas, ideologies, pathologies, disorders, behaviors, and actions that tend to inflict various degrees of harm at various degrees of severity. So it's very, very important that we develop a healthy civil, ethical, moral, uncivil, unethical, immoral perceptions, behaviors, emotions, ideas, thoughts, actions, motivations, and, and emotional responses so that we can maintain these healthy relations, and also it'll foster greater well-being within ourselves, so that's highly important that we do that. And that's all I wanted to say for this video.